30 Days of Persuasion Plays with me, Paul Macetta. Welcome to the next episode. Classic influence, persuasion, salesmanship, human psychology, human communication tactic that I'm going to share with you today. Very simple, very basic, very powerful. And that is this. If nothing else, if you learn nothing else about persuasion, if you learn nothing else about human communication, how to improve your communication skills, how to sell more, how to get more people to say yes, how to build long-lasting, positive, nurturing relationships. If you learn nothing else, learn how to ask great questions. Because I got to tell you, while I truly believe that equipping yourself with the most amount of knowledge possible when it comes to human communication is definitely your best route. In other words, there is no one technique or strategy that works all of the time. It's about learning as much as you possibly can and then implementing what works at the right time. If you just didn't have the time or the interest to do that, I would tell you to just learn how to ask great questions. And the reason why is because questions are very powerful. Extremely powerful. And part of the reason why they're powerful is because the human mind is a goal-seeking machine. I learned that in a book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. Pick up that book, read it if you have not already. It's an old book, 30 or 40 years old, written by a plastic surgeon. And you would think, well, what does a plastic surgeon know about self-improvement? Well, turns out he actually knew a lot about it. He learned that by changing someone's appearance, in some cases you can change their inner part, or you can change their outlook on life, and then in some cases it doesn't work, that no matter how much you change the outside appearance, the inner appearance, so to speak, doesn't change. But he learned a lot about the way the mind works. And his whole premise in the book is that the mind is a goal-seeking, goal-achieving machine, meaning that when you give the brain something to do, it has no choice but to focus on solving that problem. It is a problem-solving machine, which is where the cybernetics aspect comes into it. Cybernetics is the science of problem-solving. He just applied it to mental processes or how the brain works. Well, another interesting thing about the brain is that when you ask it a question, it has no choice but to want to answer it. Even if it's a question that you don't want to answer. So if I were to ask you a question that you don't even want to answer, that's put you in an uncomfortable situation, while you might not verbally answer that question, in your mind, you are going to want to answer that question. You might even want to come up with reasons why you can't answer that question. But the bottom line is, when the mind is posed with a question, it seeks to find an answer. And this is why in copywriting, headlines that ask questions are very powerful. Because again, when the brain reads or hears a question, it can't help but begin to start searching for an answer. So questions and asking people questions are great for a number of reasons. First of all, in an influence, persuasion, sales situation or environment, what they allow you to do is learn about the person that you're trying to sell or the person that you're trying to influence or persuade. They allow you to learn about their thoughts, desires, feelings, wants, needs, so that you can tailor your presentation to all of those different things. They also allow you to uncover any possible objections that the person might have to buying your product or service, so that you're equipped to deal and overcome those objections later on in the sales presentation. But even in social situations, or even in non-sales situations, in situations where you just want to build a good relationship with somebody and open up a good line of communication with them, questions are extremely valuable because, number one, they open up the line of communication. You know, many years ago, when I was a young stud, free, roaming the world, before I settled down with my wife and my 2 children, I went out on a lot of dates. And we've all been in that situation at one time or another when you're on a date and all of a sudden you find yourself in that awkward silent moment where you have nothing to say, they have nothing to say, and it's awkward. Well, what I quickly realized, because as I was in that dating world, I was still studying influence, persuasion, human communication, salesmanship, was that if I just simply asked enough questions, I could instantly open up that line of communication again. So it almost became habitual to where I would have 5 to 10 questions locked and loaded in the chamber, ready to fire if I found myself in an awkward situation. Because the minute I ask a question, an open-ended question, not a closed-ended question, right? So if you don't know, the difference between the two is an open-ended question forces the person to elaborate. A closed-ended question requires a yes or no or a simple, straightforward answer. So a closed-ended question is, what color is your car? Black. An open-ended question is, why did you buy your car, right? It forces the person to elaborate. So just a quick kind of tutorial on the difference between the two. But when you learn how to ask great open-ended questions, again, in a sales environment, sales situation, influence, persuasion environment, it enables you to gather intelligence about that person. But even in situations that don't require influence or persuasion or salesmanship per se, they allow you to open up the line of communication because, as I said before, once the brain encounters a question, it seeks to answer that question. So, tip number 1, I got 3 tips for you today when it comes to asking great questions. Tip number 1 is very simple. If you're unsure of what type of questions to ask, simply go back to the who, what, when, where, and why. The who, what, when, where, and why, and then you could even intertwine the how in there. So, when someone tells you, if you find yourself, let's say, in a situation where things have gone stale, you're in that awkward, silent moment, what do you do for a living? I'm an accountant. Oh, wow, that's great. When did you start doing that? Oh, I actually got into it right after I graduated college, and I think I was around 22 years old. Oh, okay. And where did you go to school? Well, I went to school here, blah, 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 blah. And why is this important to you? Well, it's important to me because of blah, 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 blah. And what is your average day like? Or tax season must be crazy, right? Blah, 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 right? So just utilize the who, what, when, where, why, and in some cases you can utilize the how. But those are just simply ways of thinking in terms of how to ask great questions. Tip number 2 is to utilize a classic NLP strategy called the Metamodel. So if you have never studied NLP before, NLP is a body of knowledge. I'm a big believer in it. It's what Tony Robbins uses to help high caliber people such as celebrities, movie stars, athletes achieve higher levels of greatness in their life. And he does that by using a communication model from NLP. So NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, was created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder over 30 years ago. And the way that I look at it is it's a blueprint to the mind. It kind of gives us an exact reason and definition why we do the things that we do based on the way that we interpret the world. And in developing NLP, they studied master communicators because one of the principles of NLP is if somebody can do something great, you can model them and achieve the exact same great results that they're achieving. And so they studied these master communicators. And what they learned was that all 3 of these communicators, while they were great at what they did, they communicated in different ways. Well, one of the communicators that they studied was Dr. Milton Erickson, who's known as the father of modern hypnotherapy, who was a master communicator who could achieve results with his hypnosis clients that other hypnotherapists simply could not. A guy who basically cured himself of polio by training himself through memories to fix his muscles and begin to learn how to walk again. Extraordinary guy, right? Amazing human being. Well, one of the things that Erickson did when he spoke to people was he would use ambiguous phrases and he would be very vague. So if someone were to come to you and say, this woman crashed into my car this morning, I was pulling out of a parking spot, she crashed into me, it was totally her fault. When I got out of the car, she started yelling at me as if it was my fault. You would say something vague and ambiguous like, people are crazy. And that would open them up to start talking more about it because they feel like you can identify with them, right? So you make very vague general statements. Well, the opposite of that is something called the Metamodel. So that's the Milton model based off of Milton Erickson. Works very effective in creating rapport, creating connection, letting people know that you understand where they're coming from and what they're going through. And then there's the Metamodel. So the Metamodel is the complete inverse of the Milton model. And you use the Metamodel when somebody else is being vague. So, for example, your wife comes home from work. She's upset. She looks distraught. You say to her, honey, what's the matter with you? And she turns around to you and she says, people are crazy. So she just made a very ambiguous, general, vague statement. And really what this is it's a simple way of us kind of filtering our experiences. So again, I said this in an earlier episode, we are cognitive misers, right? Meaning that the mind does not like to expend all of its cognitive resources. So what we do is we take tons of mental shortcuts all throughout the day, all throughout our lives, really, to make sense of the world. And one of the ways that we do that is through mental filters called generalizations and distortions and deletions, right? So one way is we make general statements. Another way is we distort experiences. And then another way is that we delete experiences. So by the time we actually convey the experience to somebody else, the whole thing is messed up, right? And so oftentimes we have to get people to be more specific. So really the Metamodel is just taking somebody who's being very general and getting them to be very specific. So when somebody says to you, people are crazy, what people are crazy? Why are they crazy? How did you come to this assumption? Where did this happen? You just simply drill down using the Metamodel, and you can just simply Google Metamodel if you want to understand how it works, but you're just simply taking somebody who's utilizing mental filters as they're speaking. They're either utilizing distortion, deletion, or generalization, and you're getting them to be more specific in what they're talking about. Very valuable tool. I find that the Milton model and the Metamodel both work equally as effective for different times and different circumstances. I'll probably shoot a video on the Milton model. If I don't, it will be included in the Persuasion playbook. But for the sake of this video, go check out the Metamodel. Google it, add it to your repertoire of things to use. And again, the third tip for you is really just circling back to the first one, which is to ask open-ended questions, right? I said that in the beginning of this. You don't want to ask closed-ended questions. You don't want to ask people questions that result in them giving you a one-word or a one-sentence type of answer. You want to be able to get them to elaborate on whatever it is that you want to talk to them about. So again, if you learn nothing else about human communication, simply learn how to ask great questions. And with that alone, you will be armed with techniques and strategies far beyond the average person who doesn't study any of this stuff. So again, ask the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Utilize the Metamodel. Ask open-ended questions. If you enjoyed this video, like it, leave a comment. Make sure you click the subscribe button so you get updated when I release new videos.